If you're a fan of Bleach, then the 17th of June will be an unforgettable day for you. This day marks the anniversary of the death of Ichigo's mother, Masaki Kurosaki. Within chapter 17 of the manga, Ichigo remarks to Rukia that his mother did not just die, but she was murdered. For the majority of the story, we were under the impression that Masaki had died at the hands of the Grand Fisher, but in actuality we learn about the true circumstances surrounding the death of Masaki during the Everything But the Rain flashback arc. It is revealed that Masaki was actually a Quincy, and that Yhwach had played a major role in the death of Masaki when he had casted Ashwaunen 9 years before the present timeline of the story. His ability Ashwaunen had robbed all of the impure Quincy of their power, thus rendering Masaki powerless to defend herself against the Grand Fisher. In this video, I want to theorize whether if it was possible for Masaki's death to have been prevented, and if Masaki didn't end up dying, how would this have affected the story of Bleach? Within this video, I want to explore how Ichigo's growth as a Shinigami and a Quincy would have been affected by this one change within the story, by allowing Masaki Kurosaki to live. It's undeniable that this change would have major repercussions for other characters within the story, so my goal within this video is not to come up with some terrible fanfiction about Masaki, but rather I want to create some plausible theories about how her survival would impact the entire Bleach story. Be sure to stick around until the very end of this video, as I'll be theorizing about the role that Yhwach would have played within the final arc of Bleach if Masaki was still alive. So without further delay, here is my what if scenario, which explains how Kubo may have written Bleach if he had decided to keep Masaki alive. Discover the Undead Collection and be amongst the very first to join us on our journey over at getsuga.com. During the early portions of Bleach, Kubo does an excellent job of establishing the relationship between Ichigo and his mother. Within chapter 18, Tatsuki fondly remembers how she had first met Ichigo when they were only 4 years old. This was during their time spent at the dojo. She proudly recalls how she would make Ichigo cry during their practice, but as soon as Ichigo had seen his mother who had come to pick him up, his face would instantly transform and he would get a huge grin on his face. It is obvious that Masaki Kurosaki had played a massive role in the formative years of Ichigo. Even Tatsuki had noticed that she had meant the world to him. Ichigo's confrontation with the Grand Fisher takes place between chapters 20 to 24. This was one of Ichigo's first major battles within the story, as he was finally able to confront the Hollow who was responsible for the death of his mother. Within chapter 25, Ichigo asks Rukia if she can let him be a Shinigami for a while longer. He says this after the Grand Fisher escapes, as Ichigo admits that he wasn't strong enough to avenge the death of his mother or to protect the people around him. Ever since Ichigo was a child, he has always had this strong desire to protect his loved ones. This was further amplified by the pain that he had felt after losing his mother, and how he had felt responsible for her dying. Ichigo reaffirms his desire to protect his loved ones within chapter 47 when he confronts Uryu about the conflict between the Shinigami and the Quincy. Ichigo tells Uryu that his mother was killed by a Hollow. Ever since that day, his entire family has had a rough time, and Ichigo just doesn't want anyone else to go through this type of pain. Despite being rivals at the time, looking at this moment in hindsight is insane to realize that Uryu had also lost his mother when Yhwach had casted Ashwaunen. Now if Masaki somehow survived within the Bleach story, we are going to have to make the assumption that Yhwach had performed the Ashwaunen at a slightly later time than the original story suggests. This would mean that she was able to defeat the Grand Fisher. Furthermore, Masaki ended up surviving the Ashwaunen when it was actually performed. We know that this isn't entirely out of the realm of possibility, since Uryu had also survived the Ashwaunen despite being a mixed-blooded Quincy. Now this of course could be attributed to his latent shrift ability called the Antithesis, but I think that Masaki may well have survived with the help of the Hollow White, which had tainted Masaki, thus making her a mixed-blooded Quincy. If Masaki had survived within the story, then the first major change would be Ichigo's education about the Quincy, as well as the reasoning behind why he is able to see ghosts. If Ashwaunen is casted later, then Ichigo would have seen firsthand his mother utilizing Quincy powers in order to defeat the Grand Fisher. Ichigo would have been exposed to all of this at a very young age, so he would have had plenty of questions for his mother after she had used her powers to protect them. I'm assuming that Masaki would have no choice but to tell Ichigo about his unique heritage. At a very very early point within the story, Ichigo would learn about his Quincy and Shinigami powers. Masaki would then reveal that she is a pure-blooded Quincy who was attacked by a hollow before Ichigo was born. Much like how Soken Ishida had trained Uryu in the ways of the Quincy, I'm assuming that Masaki would similarly have undertaken this role of a mentor, and we can speculate that Masaki might have taught Ichigo about the existence of the hollow white within his soul. In chapter 535, Urahara reveals that Masaki has undergone the process known as holification. In order to stop this, Isshin's Shinigami powers were utilized as a powerful opposing force which had suppressed Masaki's holification, thus resulting in Isshin foregoing his Shinigami powers and tethering his soul to Masaki's until the day that she dies. When Ichigo was born, the hollow white within his mother had merged with the Shinigami powers that he had inherited with his father, thus forming a unique hollow Shinigami Zanpakuto spirit, and thus this is how the true form of Zangetsu was created. However, for the majority of the Bleach story, Ichigo was under the impression that Onman Zangetsu was his Zanpakuto spirit, and his inner hollow was a separate entity which existed just to cause him fear. I honestly believe that if Masaki had survived, then she would have educated him about the hollow white as well as its origins, and thus Ichigo would have learned to embrace his inner hollow much sooner within the story rather than rejecting and suppressing it. One of the main reasons that Ichigo suppresses his inner hollow during the Arrancar arc is because his mother was killed by a hollow, so he has an understandable fear or reluctance to accepting help from a hollow. In addition to learning and mastering his Shinigami powers earlier on, Ichigo may well have learnt abilities and techniques such as Blut Artery and Blut Vein. Blut Vein allows a Quincy to flow spirit particles directly into their blood vessels to briefly enhance their defensive and spiritual abilities. This would ensure that Ichigo would be able to defend himself if he were to ever encounter a hollow at a young age. With the help of his mother, Ichigo would have also learnt how to manifest and wield a Quincy bow, and I'm sure that she would have taught him how to use techniques like Haren Hyaku. Due to the limited time frame of the Everything But the Rain flashback arc, we do not have much room to speculate about whether or not if Masaki knows about advanced Quincy techniques like Ranso Tengai or the Quincy Let Steal ability. When Masaki helps to protect Isshin, we see that she has enough proficiency with Quincy techniques in order to hold her own against a powerful hollow like White. Now, with Masaki leaving the Ishida household at a very young age, we can speculate that her Quincy education was far from complete. So for this reason, he may have needed to seek out another source in order to further enhance his Quincy knowledge. This perfectly leads me on to my next point. With Masaki's former ties to the Ishida household, there is a very high probability that Masaki would have prevented Ichigo from viewing Uryu as an enemy. In chapter 46, we learn that Quincy's are viewed as the enemies of the Shinigami. This is because the Quincy's completely eradicate hollows as well as the accompanying soul, whereas Shinigami purify hollows and send the soul to the Soul Society. Uryu has an intense hatred for the Shinigami because he reveals to Ichigo that his grandfather was attacked by a group of 5 hollows, and the Shinigami had purposefully delayed their arrival, knowing that Soken Ishida was outnumbered. This had tragically led to the loss of his life an hour before the Shinigami had arrived. During this time, Uryu challenges Ichigo to a contest to see who can kill the most hollows, in order to prove the superiority of the Quincy over the Shinigami. If Masaki was still alive, then Ichigo would probably have revealed to Uryu that he is a being who possesses both Shinigami and Quincy powers. This would have then eliminated the need for them to even become rivals or for this challenge to have initiated in the first place. There is a possibility that Masaki would have allowed Ichigo to train with Soken Ishida also. This may have also played a role in helping Soken Ishida to survive if both Ichigo and Uryu were present while Soken Ishida was battling against those 5 hollows. Maybe Masaki could have intervened and assisted Soken Ishida during this time too. So it's a bit like a domino effect. If Masaki remains alive, then it may have resulted in Soken Ishida remaining alive too. Strangely enough, Soken Ishida was absent during the events of the Everything But the Rain flashback arc, but from what we have seen of Soken Ishida, we can appreciate that he was very progressive with his beliefs, as he had desired for Shinigami and Quincy to work together. So I believe that Soken Ishida would have accepted Masaki despite knowing that she is being tainted by a hollow. This leads me to believe that Masaki may well have kept in touch with Soken Ishida, and this is something that may well be revealed during Core 3 and 4 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime, when Kubo and the anime staff reveal to us more details details about Uryu's grandfather and the possible role that he had played within Yhwach's Wandenreich Empire. Now let's talk about how Masaki remaining alive would have affected the different story arcs of Bleach. I think that major changes would occur to the Substitute Shinigami arc, the Arrancar arc, and lastly the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Firstly, the Substitute Shinigami arc focuses on the awakening of Ichigo's Shinigami powers, and a massive emphasis is placed upon Ichigo's unique ability to see spirits, which interrupts his ability to live a normal life. Now everything changes for him when he meets Rukia Kuchiki, who breaks the laws of the Soul Society by transferring her Shinigami powers to him. Within these chapters we also get to learn a lot about Ichigo's family and how Isshin is a very goofy father who is trying his best to keep his family together. Now if Masaki was still alive, I believe that this would nullify the impact of Rukia's arrival into Ichigo's life. Within the very first page of the chapter, when Rukia descends upon Karakura town, the narration states, "And so fell the sword of fate." Well, if Masaki remained alive, then Ichigo may well have awakened his Shinigami powers by the time that Rukia arrives within Karakura town, thus robbing the impact of this fateful encounter. Ichigo would no longer have a meeting with the Grand Fisher because he is already being killed by Masaki. Furthermore, if Ichigo learns about hollows from Masaki, then he may well have defeated the Grand Fisher before Rukia had the need to get involved. This is because even in the first chapter of the manga, Ichigo was able to hear the roars of the hollow, while Rukia's senses were scrambled by Ichigo's intense spiritual pressure. With Masaki being alive, Kubo would really struggle to characterize Ichigo as a moody, strong-willed teenager who was fated to meet Rukia and thus become a substitute Shinigami. The first chapter of Bleach, Ichigo states that the existence of Shinigami had never crossed his mind. Something else would need to happen to Rukia in order for her to request a Gigai from Urahara, and I'm sure that this is where Urahara would get involved and he would somehow scheme a way for him to hide his Hokyoku within the Gigai that Rukia borrows, and this would then lead to Aizen getting involved and manipulating the Soul Society to retrieve Rukia from the world of the living and to execute her. So there's two possibilities: Masaki trains Ichigo and he awakens his Shinigami powers at an early age, or the Bleach story plays out similarly and Rukia shares her powers with Ichigo, thus awakening his latent Shinigami powers, and the story plays out in a very similar manner but with Masaki alive. Personally, I think the former would be more realistic, and Urahara would definitely need to get involved by finding a way to drain Rukia of her Shinigami powers, thus leaving her with no choice but to accept a Gigai from him. Now during the Arrancar arc, Aizen emphasizes in chapter 396 that he was overseeing all of Ichigo's battles. He states that Ichigo was his research subject who he had been carefully analyzing. Aizen even taunts Ichigo by asking if he really had thought that all of the fights that he had won up until this point were brought about by his own efforts. Aizen concludes his taunting by revealing that he has known about Ichigo from the very moment that he was born. All of this makes a lot more sense thanks to the Everything But the Rain flashback arc, which reveals that Aizen was responsible for Ichigo's parents meeting within the world of the living after he had created the Hollow White which had attacked Isshin. I believe that if Masaki was alive during the Arrancar arc, then Aizen would not be this overseeing puppet master over Ichigo's life. Now this is not to say that Masaki knows about Aizen's role in the creation of White, but I do speculate that Ichigo would be less vulnerable to Aizen's manipulation because at the very least he would have some understanding about his own hollow powers and the fact that his father is a Shinigami and his mother is a Quincy. Ichigo might even be able to put two and two together by deducing that Aizen had created the Hollow White which had attacked his mother. Additionally, I don't think that Ichigo would have been so shocked to see his father in Shinigami attire at the end of chapter 397. Now we know that Ichigo inherits the Hollow White, which in some way means that Isshin's soul was then tethered to Ichigo's soul, but this had become weakened after Ichigo had awakened his own latent Shinigami powers, which had resulted in Ichigo's Hollow Shinigami hybrid powers slowly manifesting until the point that his Hollow completely takes over during his battle against Byakuya, which marks the point that Isshin had in fact reawakened his Shinigami powers. So I feel like this would remain unaltered if Masaki had remained alive, which honestly would be so cool as I'd love to see Masaki see Isshin in his Shinigami attire again. Now finally, Masaki remaining alive would have changed almost everything about the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Firstly, there would be no big reveal about Masaki dying thanks to the Ashmalen. Yhwach may well have wanted to recruit Masaki into to the Vandenreich for the same reason that he had wanted to recruit Uryu, because they had both survived the Ashwaunen. Maybe Yhwach could have convinced Masaki to join by revealing the knowledge that Ichigo is simply a pawn to be used by Ichibei Hyosube as a possible replacement for the Soul King. Now this theory is entirely plausible because in chapter 612, Ichibei admits to himself that Ichigo and his team cannot defeat Yhwach. This is evil because Ichibei was the very same person who had encouraged Ichigo to stop Yhwach. He had known that Ichigo was going to lose and the Soul King was going to fall. Yhwach, using the powers of the Almighty, refers to Ichigo as an insect that is about to be crushed by the gears of fate. He states that burying Ichigo with his own hands is the least that he could do. This is Yhwach's way of showing mercy to Ichigo after he comes to understand that Ichibei was planning on making Ichigo the next Soul King. If Masaki ended up joining the Vandenreich, it would change the entire story. It's possible that she could have gone down a traitor arc like Uryu, and the two of them could have worked together to defeat Yhwach on the inside, but for the time being, while Ichigo and the others are unaware of their true motives, it could have played a massive emotional impact if Ichigo realizes that his mother Masaki as well as his friend Uryu, who have both joined the enemy side. Now as a character, Masaki has an undeniable legacy as she is characterized as a brave and affectionate woman who is often remembered at several points of the Bleach story despite not being alive. You can even draw parallels between Masaki's character and Rukia's, in that they were both women who had defied the status quo in order to protect a complete stranger. Some fans have circulated the idea that Masaki may well still be alive and her soul is currently residing within the Rukongai district, but because Masaki was killed by a hollow, I believe that her soul would have become a part of the Grand Fisher, and thus unfortunately she would not have had the chance to pass over to the Soul Society. This entire video has been me theorizing and guessing as to how the story would have changed if Ichigo's mother had remained alive. If Masaki had survived everything that had happened within the story, then the inner turmoil that exists within Ichigo would not have arisen in the first place. Ichigo would have accepted and understood that his inner hollow is in fact his Zanpakuto spirit at a very early age, and this would have made Rukia's involvement within the story totally unnecessary. We've now reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What do you think about the theories that I've proposed within this video? Do you agree with the changes that I've made to the Bleach story if Masaki had remained alive? Let me know all of your thoughts on how the story of Bleach would have been changed if this one decision was altered by Kubo. If there's anything that I've forgotten to mention or I've overlooked about the character of Masaki and this what if theory, then definitely let me know by leaving a comment under this video. And lastly, thank you for making it to the very end of this one, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach theory video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.